Okay, cool. Great. So I will start by doing something which I don't normally do, which is just talk about my last name a little bit. Because when I knew you, Freddie, I was Elaine Park. And it just, it was easy to say and easy to read and know what it is. So some people think my name is Andrade or Andrade. My husband's family is actually from Cape Verde, but by way of New Bedford, Massachusetts. So we say Andrade. And I think that it's interesting because it also kind of becomes a encapsulation of, this notion of like a very dimensionalized identity. And I think that's a lot of what I wanted to start to circle around is how do you make that identity part of your equity as a person? How do you bring that into every conversation that you have and turn that into career defining moments? So that is what I want to talk about today. Just give some perspective from my career path, and talk about what I've learned in that road. So who is an outsider and how am I using it today? Just the definition of it, a person who is outside of a group, right? But I think that for me, especially as a woman and a woman of color, I used to fall back on trying to ignore my outsiderness and just tell myself, that I do belong here. And I think that's a big part of it. And there's a strength that comes from that. But when I started thinking about my journey, I really realized that leaning into my outsiderness was actually really critical to my career. So I'm going to talk about why and how you can use that too. Ultimately, I did not belong to a lot of groups, and there were so many industries that I was interested in, but I was an outsider to all of them, right? I was fascinated by advertising. I wanted to be a driver of business decisions. I wanted to be in entertainment. I wanted to sell original music and bring tech to creative solutions. But I didn't go to ad school, and I don't have an MBA, and I don't want to live in LA, and I never dropped a record. And the only language I could ever really code in is now literally obsolete, right? But that was actually the advantage. That all worked out really well for me. These are some highlights from my career, right? After UDM, where I learned so much. I became an art director at Common Ground Marketing there in Chicago. And then I moved from Chicago to New York. I was doing websites, digital video. I went to Saatchi & Saatchi. I spent a few years making TV commercials. Then I went to go run creative at the social agency that was owned by Vice. After that, I got into digital entertainment through Fullscreen, which is how I found myself part of the larger WarnerMedia entertainment organization. And this was not a very planned out career path. I moved around a lot. I went from shop to shop, but I also went from sector to sector. And each move that I made put me back into an outsider position. So I just want to share how I was able to make that really work for me in a way that I love right now. Today, you can find me at House of Max, which we recently launched. We produce a lot of different branded content formats for HBO Max. We wanted to build a creative offering that worked in a Hollywood studio kind of way, but also in a digital streaming social way. And I love entertainment. I love watching TV. I love HBO Max. I love creating in all of these formats. So for me, as jobs go, this is my dream job. So where I'm coming from today in any of the advice that I want to give to you is just to make sure that you don't ever let a feeling of not belonging get in your way. You can use your outsiderness. It is a state of being from which you can offer more. And that is a really important mind state to be in. So there are a few key advantages that I want to point out, and I'm going to center kind of the story along them. Advantage number one, you see more ways than one as an outsider. And I think, in entertainment, especially, but also in advertising and business, there are all sorts of networks that you depend on getting into in order to succeed. And feeling confident in what you bring to that network is so critical. So this is a really important state of mind for me. Like I said, I think that outsiders in general are accustomed to looking at things in more than one way. Right? You're accustomed to putting yourself in the shoes of the insider and decoding their expectations of you. But of course, you also understand the expectations of the world you came from. And when you feel confident and empowered to see things both ways and bring that way of seeing to every conversation that you have and every idea that you're trying to sell, you can break boundaries in a way that is truly authentic to who you are. Personally, I represent a very classic dichotomy of being a first-generation American. I am super American. I was born in Wisconsin. I drink Starbucks, right? But I'm also super Korean. I like period dramas and Burberry scarves, and there's a whole food component as well to that. But I think that, for me, the main thing that shaped what I felt like was my unique identity, the Elaine-ness of it all, was all the ways in which I felt like an outsider on both sides of that equation. In many ways, that's how I understood my own identity early on, in all the ways that I am not truly typically Korean, and all the ways in which I am not a classic image of an American girl, but instead I'm something else and something in between. And ultimately, I think that living that truth is where I discovered my comfort with discomfort. That is to say, I feel a lot of purpose from that. Living in that space means living outside of stereotypes. And my existence ultimately then dimensionalizes the expectations that people might have of Asian American women for anybody that I encounter. So this not Eastern, this not Western thing. This is the fundamental conflict of like my whole being, I think. And personally, I think that separately from that, my tendency to like really lean into spaces between hard definitions has ultimately brought a lot of opportunity to my doorway, and a lot of success in my career. And so I live in constant gratitude for that otherness, because it really does define the way that I see things. There are so many different facets to otherness, though, too. And, I grew up in a really small, not very diverse college town in Indiana. And so I think for me, growing up, I was just really hungry for inspiration. And I had to work extra hard just to get access to it. It was before the internet. So I grew to love big cities, and I love Chicago, and I love LA and Atlanta. I really love New York, but I'll never be a native to New York, and I don't mind, right? I've been living here for 13 years now. We have so much culture at our fingertips, so much creative inspiration and stimulation. But this whole time, I've been really cognizant and intentional about not shedding my small townness, right? I like being impressed by everything constantly and staying open to be in awe of things, and not trying to crystallize the things that I like, but just constantly being, enveloped by all the stimuli around us. That is such a big part of who I am. And I think that that's just being true to where I came from and where I am now. And I think that's also why I've really never grown that jaded. I've never moved to Connecticut. I'm just really comfortable with this state of in-betweenness, and it's just another way that it defines who I am. Another example, I did not start out intending to be a leader in media. As a kid, I wanted to be a painter and a musician and a writer. And I think that in joining all of these artistic worlds, I noticed that a lot of artists go through a thing where they wonder if, being in business with their craft means compromising their creative spirit and vision in some way. And I just did not. I always knew that I wanted to use my creative power to create a rich life, and that I wanted to be successful, but I wanted to do it in the most fun and most interesting and purpose-driven way possible. And so that is ultimately how I found content as a career path, that I was able to bring all the things that I learned from the art world, the passion and my eye and all of my making abilities, and put that into making really engaging and effective and KPI driving content for big businesses. And so even today, I think of myself as sometimes I'm an artist talking to business people, and conversely, sometimes I'm a business person talking to artists. So I think that, again, for me, living on the periphery between both worlds is what really allowed me to excel at bringing them together. And I think everybody has a story like that. I'm so curious, to hear if there are those of you who feel like you're also skirting on the edge between two worlds, and, what was once a friction or a conflict, you've come to realize is also a strength, because I know that I'm not alone. But I do think that, I have a very extreme level of comfort with that friction. And so I think that's why I get to enjoy so much of what I see on both sides of the fence. That brings me to my second key advantage to being an outsider, which is that you build new worlds. I think that, the nature of breaking into a closed network requires decoding and building bridges and translating between those places that you've come from, the places you're trying to go. And I think an outsider is always going to be bringing something different and something important, which is the opportunity to kind of stir those two things together, right? To, aim for unity, right? And harmony between two opposing worlds, but, at the very least, just some positive commingling, I think. And I know for me that I take a lot of joy in bringing worlds together. So I just want to show you a few examples of that and how that has translated from a conversation around my identity to a way in which I'm able to bring different capabilities to the businesses that I'm a part of. Traditional versus digital. I think these two modes really set up where my career is today. So I worked in traditional advertising. I made television commercials. Everything was very, very premium, very strategic, very thoughtfully planned, and very, very slow in terms of rates of production. And then you're seeing the rise of social media and digital. You're seeing new creators and new ways of creating. You're seeing streaming content. You're seeing, people monetizing the content that they're putting out because of these digital tools and social tools that they have available. And ultimately, that way of creating completely disrupted the landscape for every other way of creating. So if you're in a traditional world and you love that world and you found a lot of success and you've been doing it for 20 years, this is all very scary, this disruption. If you're part of that disruption and you're trying to grow the landscape of which you're a part and you're trying to grow your business, you want to start taking from those traditional models. You at least want to start taking traditional sized budgets and traditional opportunities. So I was really excited to find that and bring those two worlds together. So for me, building new ways of creating as a studio or as an agency or as a production company was just really, really exciting to me. And that's where I found my footing, I think, as a creative business leader, and bringing that traditional expertise into the digital and social landscape, bringing digital thinking to traditional brands, and doing it in ways that will allow people to scale and talk to more people, and not just make one kind of creative for one kind of person, but think now about all the different people that you can reach, all the different stories that you can tell, the more opportunities you have to be representative of the real audiences that are out there. And I found that really, really fulfilling. So I think that ultimately the door for me to lead and kind of innovate through this friction was wide open, because most people from either world did not want to cross between groups. And again, I think that's just a metaphor for what it means to be a really motivated, ambitious outsider that wants to cut through, not just for the sake of opening doors, but creating pathways between two worlds. This is just another example of how objectively valuable that synthesis and way of thinking is. So I am 42 years old. I was born in 1979, and I exist on the cusp between millennials and Gen X. And I never really understood the value of that, kind of being either here nor there, right? I have all of the sort of social and emotional hangups of Generation X, but I have like all the anxieties and behaviors of a millennial, and all the screens that go along with that. And I really enjoy that. I enjoy that, being able to talk to and be a part of both sides. So I realized then, though, how valuable it was when I started doing social content for brands. And I noticed that the biggest, juiciest briefs were coming from established brands that were looking to age down their audiences. They were brands for older people wanting to reach younger people while staying true to the same voice that they've always had. And so that was something that came really naturally to me, being able to talk to both sides in a way that is authentic to the core. And I think that I was able to bring a lot of wins to the table in a very short period of time, because that was something that I always thought was possible. Sometimes people will get a brief, for an older brand, a rusty, dusty brand, and you're trying to bring it to youth culture, and you automatically think, that's not going to work. It's not relevant. There's nothing for this brand that this brand has to offer, this culture that is into D2C brands and, disruptive ways of thinking, cool, chic, new packaging, all of that stuff. But actually the truth is, it's just puzzles to solve. It's just translations to create. And that was where, again, I found a lot of joy in just being in the middle. My last example is two worlds that are still going through it. And I didn't have a TV while I lived in Chicago. I did DVDs by mail, right? And I think that I kind of always understood that there's something about the traditional way of consuming content, traditional corded content, that was about to start changing in a really big way. What I didn't understand was like how big and vast that change was going to be. So that was just an inkling that I had, 8 years ago, and all based on gut instincts. But my real entry into this intersection between tech and Hollywood was actually working with YouTube influencers. We were making brand deals so successful because we understood the algorithms, we understood the audiences, we were looking at the data, we were constantly responding to that data. And that's not that different from how television used to look at Nielsen ratings or how movie studios were looking at box office numbers. But now you have this nonstop cycle of feedback that is 1,000 times faster than I think what any of us were prepared for. And at the end of the day, on top of it all, you have this point of view from Hollywood that, data itself doesn't make great content, right? Creativity does. Humans do. Humans tell those stories. Data can, however, steer you. It can enrich your thinking. It can bring new insights and new opportunities, new sparks of creative ideation to the story that you're trying to tell. Data can also validate the stories that you're telling. It can validate your approach. So that tension between tech and Hollywood is really a tension ultimately between data and creativity. And I think that, knowing how to talk tech to Hollywood and how to talk Hollywood to tech just continues to be this ongoing challenge. It is literally different languages, and getting them to speak to one another isn't just a game of translation in this case, but in kind of creating a whole new language in and of itself. So this is a world in which I sit today, and again, in which I'm really, really comfortable. And that brings me to the last advantage, ultimately. You are a new voice, and that is such an advantage. The outsider brings a new voice to any world you are entering. You see things differently, you create new worlds, and you tell new stories in new ways. So I think it's important to appreciate that for many people, your voice has probably had a journey of its own, and this is a complicated thing to tackle and to confront, because there are some outsiders that have a different native language, and there are some outsiders that work really hard to lose their accents. There are some outsiders that are forced to code switch to even enter a conversation, and that's a problem. We want to see that change. But at the same time, the ability to think across multiple languages is a muscle. The ability to pick up and enter into those languages is a practice. And if you are able to speak different languages and still be true to your voice and your thoughts, it just becomes another tool set, another way to bring worlds together. And this is, a metaphor that you can bring into technical aspects. So this is the Game of Thrones math. But these are languages that I learned in order to get to the specific place where I am today. And these are languages that include, technical terms. There are process terms. There is lots and lots and lots of lingo that is so different between these worlds, even when sometimes you're talking about the same thing. And so I think that starting to realize that as I was coming up and starting to cross over and see synthesis happen between worlds, see those attempts happen, and be somebody who could really start to knit together expectations, modes of operating, ways of working together, ways of finding common goals, I think was a really, really big piece of what drove me to where I am today. I think that it's such a critical piece of my career to have really accepted and embraced living between languages and using language and the acquisition of languages as a tool. Because I think that, leadership is so much about saying, I'm going to go over here. Do you want to come with me? And pulling people along by telling the story of your vision. You can't impose it on people. You can't force people to follow you as a leader. But the greater variety of people that you can communicate your vision to, the more you can do. And so I was able to move around these different sectors, move around these different spaces, understand how to motivate, how to move people, how to, get people on board with a project, with a vision, with a strategy for the future, and get them to mingle with each other in a way that they previously did not have the language themselves to do. So I just think that whether you are like me and you want to bounce around, and synthesize new worlds, or you have a more linear path in front of you, being able to explain common goals between groups is something you can take to any room you're in at any stage of your career right away. I know that a big part of what my teammates, my clients, my leadership appreciate about me is that I can help big rooms with big viewpoints that are seemingly in conflict with one another ultimately come to arrive at a common goal. And sometimes you can be in the same place and really think you're never going to get there. But sometimes it's just a matter of understanding that you guys are looking at the same thing in different ways and talking about it in different terms. Sometimes you are looking at the kaleidoscope. Sometimes you are looking through it. But if you can find a way to articulate a vision that both sides can share, you will add so much value to any room that you're in. So I think that's really the ultimate kind of run and download of all of the things that really make me specific and unique, how my identity is wrapped up into that, but how that has always informed these really pivotal moments and skill sets in my career that I think that anybody could take advantage of. And I think, again, ultimately, like the message is, if you ever feel like you don't belong, that's not a reason for you not to be there. That is more reason for you to power through and bring the thing that you are coming from and that you represent into that room and create something totally new.
Incredible. So, guys, I think this is a good chance to ask Elaine some questions. I mean, I think this, what's great about this session is, it's casual. We can kind of like, obviously I've seen some comments in the chat where people are, especially when you were going through the one piece of how you identify yourself, people were saying ditto. I think it was extremely interesting when you were talking about living between all these worlds. And I was like, yeah, even back then, I remember her living between these worlds. So, any questions for Elaine? And thank you for that, Elaine. I think it was extremely informative.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a question.
Hi.
Hi, Elaine. I'm Mina.
Hi, Mina.
So you were talking about like navigating from like all the different markets that you were in. How did you, I guess, like transition into like each one? Like, did you just like plan for it, or did it just, come out of the blue? Like, how did you prep yourself to kind of just go from market to market?
Yeah, it definitely wasn't by logic, right? I think that, a lot of times I would make a change and, I'd be talking to my mom about it and she'd be like, why are you doing this? And be like, I don't know. I just feel like if I, there's something there that I haven't seen before. If I just, work at it, it's going to work out, and she'd be like, no, I do not know. I do not know what you mean. Like, stick with what you know, and that's conventional wisdom. And it says more about her for sure. And just kind of the safety that she wanted me in. I think that, this talk could have just as easily been called like how to start to trust your gut instincts, so that was one side of it for me. Like, I always just kind of had a feeling. And I think especially when you're a creative person, or you're, you came from something really different and you want to move towards something bigger than where you are now. Like, you kind of get used to moving fast. And just kind of feeling feelings and like having a think about like, well, I don't know, like maybe I want to do music videos. Like, how am I going to make that work? Or maybe I want to move to New York, or maybe I should get into digital. A lot of times, I was just operating by instinct, and I would think to myself like, wow, social media, like this might really blow up. Like, people really like this Instagram app, and for me, stuff like that resonated with me for reasons that I can't explain, Instagram in particular. I was like, man, photography always used to be, the bastion of the elite. It was expensive. It was hard to learn. You had to have film, you had to have a camera, you had to have all this knowledge and all this stuff and all this money for constant consumables. And now all of a sudden, anybody with no money and no training, but a phone can start to make really incredible artwork. And I saw that happening. I thought like, wow, like maybe there's really something there. I might want to, check that out. And so the next thing you know, I get an opportunity that's a phone call that is to say like, hey, we have this like social media agency. We're looking for a role, but we don't really know what it is. Like, do you want to come talk? And so I went to go talk, and ultimately that role was 100% lateral to the role that I was already in. It was the same title. It was the same money. It was clearly going to be a lot harder. And I had fewer friends and less of an understanding of the world to begin with. And like, I think that was another part of it for sure. So like, that's a second piece of what I would advise. It is okay to have a non-linear path upward. For me, I decided it's worth taking that risk and just sidestepping. And maybe, even if I was up for promotion that year in this one arena and I'm going to, step backwards and start over in a completely new space, the space is calling me. I don't really know why. I feel like there's something there. I'm take the opportunity to just like learn and go with my gut instinct and make it work for me, And so I think that, what I see now a lot of times is the desire to move up the chain of title, and there's so many really important and necessary reasons for that. If there are indicators of success and they're indicators of value, and the worth that you bring to a company. But I think that it's just also important to like temper that with the long game, and really seeing like, maybe I'm not going to get the title or the pay bump that I'm expecting to get or that I should get, but maybe I'll take on a huge new skill set and a huge knowledge base with that. And that will be an investment into myself in that way. Your baby is amazing, by the way.
Yeah, I had to pick her up because I didn't want her to start like crying, and I'm just like, shh. But thank you so much. It was a great talk, very inspiring.
Thank you. Any other questions? I don't know. I remember you guys are also working in like the sort of creative and communication space. Do you feel also like there are arenas that you're seeing converge that you're well positioned to take advantage of? Or is there another personal kind of question coming out of it?
And I know Linda has a question, but I can answer that. I think like, and this actually started with our time working together. We do have a division we created called 42nd Parallel, which specifically focuses on the Asian American market. And we've had, a nice deal of success coming out the gate with that brand. And I felt like we see a lot of, I would say, kind of helping clients, guiding clients through that opportunity and understanding the merging of the population in general and how that specific group is now the tastemakers, and then kind of explaining that to people and kind of seeing how they are this specific culture of like second generation, third generation Asian Americans are kind of like leading the way in what's cool, right? So it's that explanation of things is very interesting when you're talking about like tackling because I think a lot of brands are not ready for it, and again, the conversation goes back 20 years, but it's smack in their face. And it's like saying, hey, you don't see this smack in your face, right? You see what's happening, but you're not ready for it. You want to stick with the traditional ways of approaching. You don't see the opportunity with that specific market. So we're starting kind of cracking the code on that, but I think that's a specific case where we're kind of like at an intersection, but we're growing within that intersection. With that being said, and Linda, who works daily on trying to build that intersection for us as a business, had a question for you.
Hi, Elaine. First off, thank you. That was a very insightful talk. But I did have a question. I guess, you mentioned working with influencers and just kind of crossing between traditional digital media. How do you, or advice, I guess, for people wanting to stay authentic within like influencer marketing and just social media, but also staying true to your values and, what you essentially want to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think authenticity is the key specifically, and especially when it comes to influencers, right? And I think that, that's what the brands are paying for. And I think that sometimes like the conversations can start to get heavy-handed in practice, but I think ultimately pulling back to the strategy of the whole point of doing this is to be able to reach a new audience, resonate with them more deeply than you would otherwise if you were just like pushing out your average message, So the second that starts to feel inauthentic and like a pushed message, the second it becomes a waste of money and a waste of time, for everybody. So I think that for us, what we were always able to fall back on just was like the dissection and understanding of what the audiences are engaging with, for an influencer. And that kind of starts to come back to data and insights a little bit. The audiences on somebody's channel, they're going to want to see a certain thing in a certain way, and they're going to want to see it with the personality that the influencer is known for exhibiting, the style with which they're used to making content. The second you start to degrade that, in ways that the audience doesn't want, I think that's when it becomes an opportunity to flip it a little bit, because what you can do then is start to elevate the kind of content that your influencer is making and enable the elevation of that and get audiences excited to see their influencer, their favorite person doing bigger things, having an unexpected production, fulfilling a creative dream, or, you know, just doing something that is a little out of the ordinary and unusual, but still true to that voice. And so I think that, you know, you have to flip it when you get that feedback, because it does happen all the time, right? People get heavy-handed. They've got certain messages. They've got specific ways they want to see their product be used, right? Or they've got like specific lines or genres that they want to see occur. And so I think it's about like bringing what you know about what works really well, what's core and true to the channel, to, you know, to the expectations that world around them has. And bringing it up a notch and like giving them something, not what they expected and not what they asked for, but ultimately what they really needed.
Well said. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, you know, and then sometimes you just have a tough client, you know.
Yeah.
I think that's part of it too. You know, it's hard because, you know, you want to bring opportunities to these like creators, you know, and sometimes, you know, the creators want to stretch themselves and, you know, try new things and go into new places, or they want to, you know, kind of take on more commercial work. So it's also about like, you know, kind of adapting to the specific shape of every opportunity and the way like these two puzzle pieces fit together. Because sometimes, like, I don't know, it's hard to have a blanket statement around them because everybody's, you know, just a unique snowflake, right? And that's true for the types of compromises that you feel are actually opportunities versus like the barriers that you have.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Elaine, I have a question. I think please, is that Brittany?
Yeah, yeah, it was me. Okay. I don't think, this might not apply to a lot of people here, but like as a college student who is going to the workforce soon, I guess my question is like, what kind of advice do you have for people starting out and want to go into like the industry you're in now? And especially like, because you gave a lot of examples of like where you're like an outsider in between a lot of different perspectives. Like, how do you personally brand yourself to people?
Well, how do I advise doing that in your shoes as a college student breaking in? I think that it is another kind of outsiderness, right? It's about being somebody who's new to career experiences and a longer term career journey. And I think that, you know, I think especially for people who are in creative fields, communications, you know, influence, PR, advertising, your youth is such a critical component of the advantage that you bring, your insights into what's really going on in culture, you know, the things that you're interested in, the things that you're tapped into and clued into. It is so hard to keep your finger on the pulse, you know, as like a 42-year-old woman with a 7-year-old. Like, you know, like I just depend so deeply on the younger people around me to teach me the new lingo, you know, to like bring me the new artists, to, you know, be inspired by the things that they're listening to and that they're seeing, and the illustrators and photographers that they're discovering, you know, in new places, the TikToks, you know, like there's new words now. Like chuggy is a new word that I learned this week. Do you know what I mean? And like that kind of thing is actually hugely advantageous to people in our fields, specifically, like really starting to be able to dissect and understand what's happening around them and be able to process it in ways that are authentic, again, to how like youth culture is thinking about it, to how people are using TikTok, to how people are thinking about identity, the expectations that people have of corporations in terms of purpose. Like all of that is very, very real. And those are insights that if you're living, you have to understand is such an asset to be able to bring to any corporate environment where you're trying to come up with new solutions and trying to bring worlds together and trying to, you know, sell ideas on the merits of their ability to break through and have really emotional connections with the audiences that they're trying to reach. So, you know, I think that really bringing your whole self and dimensionalizing your interests, the things you do outside of work, the passion that you have, the vision that you have for the future that you want to be a part of, you know, all of those are different ways of articulating like that special edge that you bring as an outsider to ways of working that are really established. These days inside of WarnerMedia, there's so much change going on. People used to write about it in Deadline last fall, like huge transformation sweeping across a really, really large organization, because they wanted to really start to merge together a bunch of different teams that used to be really isolated, right? It was very tribal. Everybody was an outsider to a different team, right? And there was a lot of dysfunction that came with that. So starting to rethink the way that things are done, rethinking the processes or the ways that we go to market, the position that we take with our clients and our business opportunities. That rethinking is such a critical component of success for a large organization, especially an established legacy organization with high stakes and a lot to lose. So the ability to think differently and to represent a different voice, a different perspective, it's something really new and unique to who you are. Like that's really sought after right now. I think that the other side of it is just starting to articulate your goals, and the things that you want. That's not something that I was even really able to do until I was in like my second or third job. But what I do tend to notice is that people today really come out of the gate with a lot more intention, right? A lot more of a vision, a mission. That's something that, struck me when I was talking to you initially. It's just how much intention you already have. When I was your age, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I would find jobs and quit them right away. And maybe that says something about, who I am and like the level of patience that I had back then. But I think that if you have clarity, and I think that so many young people do, about the value that they can bring and the kind of world that they want to be part of creating, those are the kinds of values and intentions and the types of people who are motivated by an inner drive that we really want to see.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that was helpful, because I never had an internship, So I think that you're probably ahead of the game in like such a big way.
Huge compliment, Brittany. You see that? We also know Brittany is ahead of the game. She's been, Linda discovered her, and she's been like a true blessing, superstar intern. So
amazing. Another shark.
Right. And I meant that in the best way.
No, I know. I don't mind at all. Although I will say that sharks are probably I'm not afraid of anything, like literally except sharks, but I'll still take it.
I can just say, Elaine, literally she was in college and she was strategizing how to win over clients, and she was still in college. You know what I mean? She was, imagine that, that's way beyond an internship. That's kind of she was getting right to business and she was still in school. And I wanted to, with that, I think one of the things today that I realized, managing people, is this whole thing about, the balance, the work-life balance, right? And, you saying, hey, your daughter is 7, or she's 7? She's 7 years old. And you're married, and then Mina just recently got married, and her baby's right there on the screen.
No, congrats.
So, and this a bit you're managing a family. Mina's managing a family. People are just having normal happiness in their everyday life. And then I can say, when I met you, and all my life, that didn't exist. It was 24/7 or die.
Yeah, hustle culture.
That's what it was. And I can say from always learning from younger people, I see Linda is into art, and I remember you used to do miniatures. I remember that because I thought it was, Elaine used to do these miniatures, this entire world in a piece, in this 4x2 piece, and she would place them in her home, and I would pick it up, and there's an entire universe within that small miniature. Do you still do those? Or
no, so I have also bounced around in mediums quite a bit, but I think that what you're talking about was a passion that I had for making things and smelling paint, right, and being getting my fingers dirty and having terrible nails all the time. You know, like I liked having like a place to go that was tactile, that allowed me to get out of my head, you know, and not have anything to do with business at all. And I think that's still really, really critical today, you know, and I think it touches on like an antidote to what you're talking about, which I think is so top of mind no matter where you work, right? Which is the balance, you know. A lot of us, and I think you and me, you know, the generation around us, like we were raised to just like work nonstop, you know, and just, you know, don't let your field lay fallow. Just like the more work you put into it, like the more yield you're going to get out of it. And so it becomes a numbers game. How many hours can you work, you know? And I think that, you know, I think that can be okay for some people. I think that some people really zen out on it. And like, I got a lot of satisfaction when I was younger on being somebody who worked really hard. I think these days, like what I have a lot of is change fatigue. You know, it's just like one change after another. And despite the fact that like my whole talk has been about moving around and bringing worlds together and changing the way that things are done, I think that there's so much change that we don't have control over in terms of the pandemic, you know, in terms of the expectations of working around the pandemic, you know, in my organization, like constant change, you know, is just a part of the fabric of being. And I think that can be really hard. You know, and so that's a different, you know, it's kind of brought a disruptive dimension to, I think, hustle culture that's made it a little bit darker. I think though that, you know, party to what you were saying, you know, having those ways to fill your own cup and do things that are just for you, whether that is, you know, goofing off with your family, you know, spending time together, you know, whether that is like reading novels, you know, and not things that are like business books, or, you know, for me these days, like, you know, it used to be painting, it used to be music, you know, it used to be like learning new instruments. Like these days it's like gardening, weirdly. And that's just the thing that it is for me that takes me out of like my headspace, you know. But I think that, you know, what I've been discovering as I've continued to grow and as a leader, you know, become responsible, not just for my own career path, but for many, many others around me on my team, you know, the people that I manage, the people that they manage. You know, what I'm realizing is that in order to do right by them, it is so critical to take care of yourself first, you know, and rising to that leadership position and having a comfort with that sometimes means being very, very skilled at like escaping into the things that make you really happy, you know, and not feeling guilty about it, you know. And I think especially when you're, you know, when you come from a place or you look like the kind of person that makes you feel like then you have to work twice as hard as everybody else to succeed, you know, you can really forget that and almost not even know how to escape from the desire to go back to work or to you know, go later into the night and work harder and faster than anybody else. But it is a really critical piece of staying agile and staying on your toes and not burning out. But it also is a really important example to set to everybody around as you continue to rise up. So it's just, you know, I think that what's been nice about the pandemic, I think, is all of the avenues with which people have had to start to kind of discover the things that they're passionate about and dedicate some time to them. And so I think that, you know, the message is just to, you know, continue to do that as we return to a normal world, in a post-pandemic world, to, you know, figure out ways to like push a button, step into, you know, your pure selfish mindset and relaxation mode, because it's not indulgent. It's actually like really, really critical, and it makes you more effective and a better leader.
Awesome. That's great. And, you know, it's the number one challenge I deal with. Like people ask me, like, talk to me about work-life balance. And I'm like, go talk to Nancy. I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I'm definitely talking to you, right? You have to fill your cup. You have to put your oxygen mask on before you help others, you know?
Yes, but thank you for that. We have a couple more minutes. Any other questions, guys, for Elaine?
This is probably a very specific question that I don't know if it applies to anybody else. But were you in the workforce, like when you first became a mother? I guess, like, how was that like change for you? Like, how did you maneuver like being a mom and also like continuing to like develop in your professional career? For just like background, like I'm 25, so I'm still very new to like my career. Like TCU is my first like real job out of college and into the field. So obviously I'm still here. So just trying to navigate like a professional career as a new mom. I guess, what did that look like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's an ebb and flow to it, like all things. And I think that when you're a new mom, you have to like give yourself the space to ebb a little bit, right? But I definitely think that I remember becoming a mom. I was an ACD at the time at Saatchi. And, even before I had my baby, I was thinking to myself, like, man, like the best producers I've ever worked with have been like moms, and I'm like, why? And it's like, oh, because moms really know what's at stake. Like they really know how to put things in perspective. They understand what's worth freaking out about and what's not, and there's such an amazing advantage and strength to that when it comes to the type of work that we do, in which there's always going to be a fire drill. There's always going to be a problem. There's always going to be something to sort out. And managing like the high frequency of vibration that comes with that is in and of itself a leadership skill. It's really, really important, and it's really hard for people to find that naturally sometimes until you start to kind of move along into different life stages and you have more to take care of, and you're, by nature, like forced to balance your brain space, your physical, resources, like all of that, like, you're able to kind of manage all the things that you have a little bit more instinctively, I think, when you're a mom. So I think the main thing is really ultimately to just understand where that's a strength, and to lean into it and not feel like there's something that you can't take advantage of. And that advantage is definitely perspective, I think. For me, I think that I was definitely intentional with the amount of time that I let myself ebb, after I had my baby. And, definitely like when I was pregnant, like, I had the space to be, like wrapped up in my own things. And I thought that was really important because that allowed me to like go harder when I really needed to concentrate, for sure. But I will say that like really specifically, it was around the time that my kid was like 8 months old where I was like, oh, I feel like I can like, work an extra few hours a day now, all of a sudden. And it started to, happen more and more and more. And so I think that, there's so much like perspective and a different like level of stamina that you're able to achieve as a result of being a mother, but you may not see those rewards until like a little bit further down the line. But I think that if you know that those rewards are coming and that it will make you stronger and it will make you sharper and it will make you able to balance and maneuver and juggle so many more things than if you didn't have that mindset, then I think that just kind of helps like look forward to it. I think a lot of new moms have an anxiety around, how can I do this? What's it going to look like a year from now? What's going to look like 3 years from now? What's going to look like when I have to, for me, it was like, oh my God, how am I ever going to drop my kid off, at school when she has to be there at 8 o'clock? Like, like it was a really hard thing for me to fathom. But certainly, if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that like humans are so amazing at adapting, and you can't premeditate the amount that you are going to be able to adapt, for sure. So definitely give yourself the space, but do it with the confidence that, you're building up a skill set that is really unique to mothers and that the rewards will come.
Thanks. She's 2 months, so I got a few left till I could pick up some extra hours already.
Yeah. I wouldn't worry about that now, right? Like,
yeah, it's been really interesting, like coming back to work, but like with the child I don't know what tired is anymore. That's like another type of word at this point, but
yeah,
thank you.
No, that's what I mean. You reached a new level.
Yeah, it's definitely different, but thank you again.
You're welcome. And I promise you will sleep again one day.
Maybe in a few years.
Maybe. No. That was an awesome question.
Elaine, I wanted to ask you a question in order to kind of help especially some of the younger folks. You mentioned the big room, right? So right now I am asking folks to step into the big room in several scenarios. Linda can't see, but I'm looking at Linda, right? I've asked Mina to step in the big room, and what that means, and the pressure of kind of like transitioning from being a younger professional and being that professional in the room, that the client could say, okay, I trust you, I'm confident in your ability. What advice can you give some of these younger professionals on the call about like what are the best, one or two things that they should take into that transition of stepping into the big room that can kind of help them, I would like them to kind of hear something from someone else, because I know that's a big transition for them right now.
Yeah, look, when, in this era that I was just describing with Mina, where, I was an ACD, I remember thinking to myself, like, what is my end game? Because I could not imagine ever stepping into that big room and speaking with conviction and expertise and a point of view and working with all of these like terrifying older people to come to a consensus about something that I wanted to do as a creative, my friend was like, you're crazy. Like it's totally fine. Like you'll be fine, and I didn't believe her at that time. And I always tell that story to say that, that level of confidence, is sometimes not there, whether or not you actually have that ability. So that can be, I think, comforting sometimes to know that, it's nerve-wracking for everybody, and you can still like rise up to a level where actually you end up being very finessed and natural and fluid, and it comes to you super naturally. For me, I definitely had to work at it. So there's definitely a period in my career where I had to be really cognizant of, not being nervous. Sometimes my heart would beat and I would have to practice like tactical breathing, like the box breathing, just to like calm my involuntary system. I would have to make a point of making eye contact like around the table and just continuing to do that in a big circle as I was talking, because otherwise I would look down or look over their heads and not really connect. I had to, make a point of telling myself that actually I'm not nervous, like I'm excited. And if you just kind of start to say that out loud, it actually, your body internalizes it and it becomes true, but I think that, the number one thing to fall back on if you're not sure what to say, or you have to present something and you don't have a really clear talk track, it's just like you tell them what you're going to talk about and then you talk about it and then you tell them what you talked about. And that will never fail to kind of create clarity in the moment. This is what I'm going to talk about today. You talk about the thing, and then you say, okay, so what we discussed was that. And if there's any questions or hesitations in the room, any one of those points, like that will come up, and that can be a springboard to a conversation. You always acknowledge a different perspective that somebody has in the room, and you say, okay, yes, and, you are saying this, we could do this, or we could do that. And I think that sometimes the anxiety comes from wanting to solve the problem in the room, and you don't have to do that ever, right? All you have to do is articulate the problem that's being spoken in your own words, repeat it back in a way that creates clarity, and then you go away and solve the problem then. So I think that if you know that that's all you're really, at the baseline, like needing to do to have a successful meeting, I think it makes it a lot less anxiety inducing to have to carry something like that on your own.
That was great. Well said. Well, I know we're a couple minutes over, but Elaine, unless there's any other questions, I'm going to let her get back to her life. Very busy life, but Elaine, thank you so much. It's truly been a pleasure. It's an honor. Personally, I'm so happy you did this, and hopefully we'll connect in New York soon. And,
absolutely.
Thank you so much. I hope the team picked up a couple of things today, and we'll, definitely take some good key learnings away from this conversation. And thank you so much. We appreciate it. We totally appreciate your time. And
thank you. Thank you again. It was such a privilege being here. If you guys have any other questions about anything or just want to connect, definitely find me on LinkedIn, send me notes. This has been like so amazing, and it's so cool that this group and this session exists. So thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Have a beautiful night. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks.